So the first thought that you probably had when clicking on this video is, what the heck does loading have to do with tabletop role-playing games? And I know everything is kind of going in the direction of AI at this point. This is not talking about letting your AI DM buffer and load your next encounter. You see, there's this common technique within a lot of video games where developers will hide various loading times and loading screens behind animations within the gameplay. If you've ever been playing a game where you're exploring some dark cave and all of a sudden you run into a narrow crack in the wall where your character slows down and has to do a very slow shimmy throughout the entire crack, and then all of a sudden you're in a new area of the cave, chances are the next area of the cave was loading while the character was squeezing through this narrow crack. But from the player's perspective, there was no break in the gameplay. There was a seamless transition from that first area to the second area. And one of the main reasons for this was to create better immersion within the world of these video games. And that got me thinking, if I want my players to be fully immersed within my D&D campaign without making D&D prep my full-time job, how can I apply this concept to my own game? Making a fully fleshed out world is no easy task, and it can be especially hard for your players to buy into that world. And one problem that I've noticed when trying to make an immersive and large world is if when I try to go all out and make a large expansive world, I end up losing a lot of details that make that world feel more lively. And inversely, if I try to focus on a few things and try to make everything detailed and realistic, I end up making my world feel a lot smaller. And in both of those scenarios, I ran the risk of my players being able to interact with so many things that I just wasn't prepared for at all. While as a DM, it is good to train improv and use improv within your game, when you are practically coming up with everything about your world and about your campaign, your world starts to feel a lot more shallow and a lot more chaotic as well. So, in theory, I had basically the same problem that these video game developers solved with the technique I explained earlier. So, how does this solution really even work? Well, let's go back to the cave example. Let's say there are 4 distinct areas within the cave and they are lined up like so. As the player traverses the cave, the area they're currently in remains loaded while the others that they aren't in stay unrendered. Whenever the player wants to go from one area of the cave to another, they end up running into an obstacle that slows them down, likely something like the crack in the wall. As they move through this obstacle, the area they were in goes away and the area they're going to loads in. So to the player, it seems like the entire cave is loaded the entire time because they never see the areas that are unloaded. Now let's look at this same scenario but how it would apply to a TTRPG. When prepping for this cave, I feel like most people would try to flesh it out and prep it all in one go. I mean, for one, you don't know how fast they're going to get through your cave. You have to be prepared for them to reach the end of the cave if they end up doing it all in one session. So let's say I'm prepping this session, and for each session I get 3 hours of prep. So for each area of this cave, I'm dedicating 45 minutes, roughly. But per area of the cave, if I want to create the level of detail and immersion that I want, I need at least an hour. It looks to me like I'm stuck between 2 bad choices. Either spend more time in my prep, which I don't have, or I can just, not be happy with my prep. But let's go back to the video game example and how they solved it. So we can say what they did in a sense was intentionally slowing the players down so they don't have access to each area all at once. If we knew for a fact that our players weren't going to reach the end of the cave by the end of this session, we wouldn't have to prep the entire cave. So how can we slow them down? Well, we need to provide obstacles that will take up a large majority of the player's time and a large majority of the session without costing us too much time in our prep. From my experience, Combat and puzzles tend to be a lot less prep work for the amount of time it takes up in a session compared to the story or roleplay or world building prep that you have to do. So, if we go back to our cave and we add a big puzzle in the first room and then a combat encounter in the second room, we are now intentionally slowing our players down. I'm a lot more confident that the players won't make it to the last area within the cave. In essence, I've created this loading time by adding these obstacles that slow the players down so that I can split this cave up into two separate sessions so that I can maintain the level of detail that I want throughout it. And that's all well and good if I'm prepping for this very specific linear cave, but what if instead my cave was set up like this? And what if instead of a cave, I was prepping for a town? Once again, I'm back at the same problem I had before. If the players can just as easily access any area that they want, then there is no telling where the players might go, and thus I must prep every area again. So it seems like we are just out of luck. But there are still a few things that you can do to incorporate these loading times within this type of area. Let's say that in this town there are 4 separate main areas: a market, a tavern, a church, and a theater. That seems like 4 areas that a town might have. Maybe. I think a theater's fun. The first solution I have would be to funnel your players to certain areas with urgent quests or events. Say, for instance, there was a certain quest line where the players had to stop this evil ritual that would summon a bunch of undead within the town at the church. So, inevitably, the players would end up being funneled towards the church area first before any of the other areas within the town. We could also have our players funneled to the tavern first before the church by setting up the questline to where they need to eavesdrop and gain information from various different local people at the tavern. And this method would also work for a less deadly or action-packed event. Say, for instance, there is a time-sensitive festival or farmer's market that's going on in one of the areas where if they don't attend during this day, they will miss out on it completely. With this solution, you are essentially increasing the odds heavily for them going to certain areas of the town. The second solution that I would have would be to limit access to certain areas until later sessions. Say, for instance, the theater is only open whenever there's a show going on, and they only provide a show once a week. So the players will end up having to wait before they can actually explore that area. Or we could have the tavern being closed for some sort of health inspection. Whatever the reason, you just have to have it make sense within the confines of your game, and your players also have to accept the reason as well. One drawback to this solution would be that if your players still find the area enticing, they might try to still force their way into the area anyways. Let's say, for instance, the market was being closed down for a murder investigation because someone got killed in broad daylight. Some players might want to learn more about this murder and go into the market anyways. If your players still want to or need to get into this area, you might not be able to stop them, so I wouldn't completely neglect prepping out this area. The third solution is more of a last resort, and that is taking a break or ending the session early if your players get to an area that you haven't prepped well enough. Of course, I would be very transparent with your players and tell them that you can only prep so much for each session. And whenever they get to a location or area that you haven't prepped within that session, you can just tell them straight up that you can take a break or save it for next session while you flesh out that area. I also tell my players that as they stray further and further away from the main quest line, I tend to have a lot less planned for them. And there is nothing stopping the players from just turning around and running straight in a random direction. But I personally don't think I should spend 5 extra hours of prep work accounting for everything within a 1-mile radius. Some people may call it railroading. I call it getting to sleep at night. And it may just be my personal preference, but I'd rather have just one really immersive experience rather than 100 meh ones, you know? So I started prepping my campaign with these loading times in mind, and ever since I started doing that, the level of detail and immersion within my game has increased significantly. It felt as though I could focus a lot more on developing out an interesting plot and including my characters within that plot, as well as creating these intricate encounters as well. But with that being said, after using this within my own game, I've definitely started noticing some pros and cons, and I'll list them out for you, starting with the first pro. Like I just said before, one of the best things about using these loading times would be that you get a greater level of immersion within your game. Out of every little tiny trick that I try to use to nickel and dime getting better at DM, nothing has really improved the quality of my sessions more than this. Con, when adding these loading times to your game, it can heavily impact the pacing of your campaign. Obviously, when you are breaking a location that should have been completed in one session to 2 or 3 sessions, you're going to end up slowing down your campaign's progress. Your campaign might start to feel really slow and boring if you don't try to add things that end up bringing excitement and intrigue to these areas. Pro, I don't have to rely on my improv as much. While some DMs like to have a more improv heavy campaign, some DMs, not including me, I find a lot more comfortable being able to rely on the notes and the prep work that I have made for the session. Con, you end up doing more prep work overall. If you would normally only spend one session at this location but instead split it up into 3, you are doing essentially 3 times the amount of prep work. You're just splitting up that prep work over multiple sessions. Pro, you end up having a lot more control over the campaign without imposing on your players too much. As I see it, the DM is like a cannon and the players are like a cannonball. At the start of each session, the DM decides where to aim the cannon and fire, while the players get to guide the cannonball in the air. If the players end up covering a large distance, there is a lot more variety within the landing spot and can veer off course from the original target that the DM had in mind. So if you slow down the players and thus have them cover less distance, you end up having a lot better of an idea where they're going to end up landing for your next session. Con, this technique only really works well on shorter sessions. I myself prefer running shorter 3 to 4 hour sessions, so I never really had much of a problem where my players would run into areas where I didn't prep for or didn't plan for. However, when talking to other DMs and other players, I noticed there's plenty of people who have sessions that go on for 7+ hours, which is almost double the amount of time that I spend on my sessions. With these longer sessions, you can't really break up some areas into multiple sessions because you can only realistically slow your players down so much before it just becomes a snail's pace campaign. Those to me are the top pros and cons for using this technique for your own game as a dungeon master or game master within your TTRPG. Obviously, I use this technique for myself, but let me know down in the comments what you like to do to create large, expansive areas of your campaign and how to create better immersion within your game as well. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so I know that I should be making more videos like this one. With all that being said, bye for now.